When Karen Hansen, the relentless HOA president, tried to cut off my water and claim I was breaking the rules, I felt the weight of injustice crushing me. She wielded her authority like a weapon, inventing fines and threats every day, determined to intimidate me into submission. But I had a secret she never saw coming. I legally owned the entire creek that supplied my house. And just wait until you see how this shocking revelation flipped the tables and finally let justice prevail. I never imagined that living in a quiet suburban neighborhood could turn into a battlefield, at least not until that morning when Karen Hansen, the president of our HOA, appeared at my doorstep. I had always thought of HOA meetings as nothing more than dull formalities. Occasional discussions about landscaping rules or mailbox standards, but nothing in those meetings had prepared me for what was waiting on my own porch. Karen arrived in her usual crisp blazer, clipboard in hand, but there was a different energy in her that day, something sharp and confrontational. Her voice cut through the morning calm before I could even greet her properly. "You need to shut off your water immediately," she demanded. "You are violating community rules, and this will not be tolerated." I froze for a moment, caught between disbelief and confusion. My mind raced. Violating rules? I had paid every fee on time, maintained my property, and followed every guideline the HOA had ever enforced. How could this be happening? As I stepped closer, trying to understand the specifics, Karen's tone didn't soften. It escalated. She waved her clipboard as if it were a weapon, pointing at the water spigot and insisting I comply instantly. "This is not negotiable," she said. The words themselves were harsh enough, but the force behind them, the conviction in her eyes, made it feel as though this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. I stood there on the porch, my hands clenched, heart pounding. Anger bubbled up, but so did a sense of utter shock. The sheer audacity of someone claiming authority over my own property, someone who had no real legal basis for this demand, left me reeling. My first instinct was to argue, to point out that I had always respected HOA regulations, but her intensity froze me. It wasn't just a casual complaint. It was a direct confrontation, a declaration of war, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who truly believed they had the right to dictate the terms of my life. And then it escalated further. Karen stepped closer to the spigot, her gestures sharp, almost aggressive, as she tried to position herself between me and the water source. "Do it now," she insisted, her voice now louder, carrying across the yard. That's when the reality hit me like a punch I hadn't seen coming. This wasn't just a disagreement or a bureaucratic argument. It had become a personal battle. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to assert dominance, to intimidate me, and she was doing it on my own property. For a few long moments, I just stood there, frozen on the porch, watching her movements, trying to process what was happening. The morning sun shone on the manicured lawns. The birds chirped as if nothing were wrong. And yet I felt a tension in the air, so sharp it almost hurt to breathe. This was the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated, something that would challenge not just my patience, but my entire sense of control over my own home. By the time I realized I needed to respond, my shock had begun to morph into a steady, simmering awareness. This wasn't a random confrontation. Karen had chosen me, and she had brought all of her authority and her determination to make me comply. The quiet neighborhood I thought I knew suddenly felt different, charged, unpredictable, and ready to test the limits of what I would tolerate. It was in that moment, standing on my porch, facing Karen Hansen and her relentless insistence, that I knew the war had begun. After that first confrontation on my porch, I thought perhaps Karen Hansen would back off. I had hoped that once she realized how unreasonable her demands were, she might take a step back and recognize that this was just a misunderstanding. But that hope quickly dissolved. Every interaction with her and her supporters only fanned the flames of my frustration into a deeper, sharper emotion: hatred. It started with the phone calls. Each day, without fail, my voicemail filled up with increasingly aggressive messages from Karen, lecturing me about violations I had never committed. She seemed to invent new rules on the spot, always finding some obscure clause buried in HOA regulations to justify her actions. At first, I tried to reason with her, calmly explaining my side, presenting receipts, and pointing out that I had followed every guideline. Each time she dismissed me, her voice dripping with certainty that she was right, and my words didn't matter. Then came the emails, hundreds of them filled with legal jargon, threats of fines, and warnings about community standing. It felt like I was being bombarded from every angle. The messages weren't just about rules. They were designed to intimidate, to wear me down, to make me doubt my own sense of fairness. Every time I read one, my chest tightened with frustration, a knot of anger growing stronger with each line. I could practically feel the tension building around me, as if the walls of my own home were shrinking under her relentless scrutiny. Her supporters only made it worse. At HOA meetings, the same faces would nod along as Karen outlined my infractions. They whispered and pointed, their eyes gleaming with the same conviction she had. It was as if the entire board had become an extension of her will, a chorus amplifying her personal vendetta. The more I saw, the more it felt like I was fighting not just one person, but an entire system aligned against me. Every polite objection I made was met with dismissal or ridicule. Every explanation I offered seemed to strengthen their determination to control me. I started noticing patterns in her behavior, and it terrified me. Karen didn't operate on logic or fairness. She operated on power. Every day she found a new excuse to assert authority. Every interaction was a calculated move to dominate. It was no longer about community rules. It was personal. Every word she spoke, every email she sent, carried a sense of satisfaction in seeing me constrained, in trying to instill fear. It was deliberate, relentless, exhausting. I felt trapped in a cycle that had no natural end. Rational arguments, documentation, even appeals to other HOA members. Nothing worked. Her stubbornness wasn't just obstinate, it was targeted, like she had chosen me as the one person to teach a lesson. That realization, the sense that I was facing a campaign of control and retribution, solidified the emotion that had been quietly simmering inside me. Hatred, not a fleeting irritation, but a burning resolve. Every attempt to undermine me only strengthened my determination to fight back. It was clear then that this wasn't going to be a short battle. Karen Hansen had turned her authority into a weapon, and her supporters were ready to wield it. The hatred I felt wasn't just anger at her behavior, it was recognition that I was up against something persistent, unfair, and deeply personal. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, I could not back down. As the days went by, Karen Hansen's relentless attacks and endless rules began to feel unbearable. The constant emails, the phone calls, the disapproving glares at HOA meetings, it all piled up into a heavy, suffocating weight. I had tried reasoning, appealing to logic, and even appealing to other board members, but nothing seemed to stick. Every interaction with her reinforced a truth I couldn't ignore. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was deliberately trying to control me. And yet, in the midst of this frustration, a single thought flashed in my mind, clear and undeniable. She had overlooked one critical fact. I legally owned the creek. Every inch of it, every curve, every trickle of water that ran through the property behind my house was mine. It wasn't just a natural feature of the land, it was mine by law, documented in property deeds and legal records that I had kept safe for years. Suddenly, everything that had felt like chaos and oppression shifted into clarity. The power that Karen thought she wielded didn't exist. She had assumed control over something she had no authority to touch. And, just like that, rage surged through me, not blind anger, but a fierce, focused energy. The next HOA meeting arrived, and I walked in with every document neatly organized, prepared, and undeniable. I could feel the eyes on me as I approached the podium, some curious, some skeptical, and some, like Karen's, full of that same false confidence I had grown to despise. I laid the papers out one by one, presenting the deeds, legal certifications, and property maps. My voice was steady, but each word carried the weight of every unfair demand, every threat, every attempt to intimidate me. These documents prove that I legally own the creek supplying my property. I stated firmly, no one here has the authority to restrict my access to water that belongs to me. The room went silent. I could see the shock ripple across Karen's face, and for the first time her supporters looked uncertain, shifting in their seats as the reality of my ownership sank in. The air was charged, not with hostility this time, but with the sudden imbalance of power. She had assumed she controlled the situation, and now the entire narrative had shifted. I realized in that moment that the emotion surging through me wasn't just anger, it was empowerment. This was my chance to reclaim control, to stand up not just for myself, but for fairness and justice in our community. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm and clear-headed amidst the tension. The rage that had built up inside me transformed into a sharp, decisive energy, a determination to ensure that no one could intimidate me or override the law. Every unfair email, every shouted threat, every dismissive glance had fueled this moment. I wasn't reacting blindly. I was asserting the truth, proving with irrefutable evidence that their authority had limits. And those limits were clearly defined by law. When I finished presenting the documents, Karen's expression was a mix of disbelief and frustration. It was a satisfying sight, not just because I had proven my rights, but because, in that instant, the balance of power had shifted entirely. I felt unstoppable, confident that the next steps I took would be guided by reason and justice rather than fear or intimidation. Rage had driven me to action, but it had now settled into a clear, unstoppable resolve to stand firm and restore fairness. That meeting marked the turning point. The tide had turned, and I was ready to reclaim my home. After weeks of tension, confrontation, and mounting frustration, the final confrontation with Karen Hansen and the HOA board reached its inevitable conclusion. I had anticipated a drawn-out battle, imagining endless meetings, phone calls, and perhaps more attempts to intimidate me. Yet when Karen's last efforts to block my water failed, it was over in a way that felt almost surreal. She retreated, her posture stiff, face flushed with the unmistakable color of humiliation. I could see in her eyes that the power she had wielded so aggressively was gone, dissolved in the undeniable truth of the property deeds I had presented. The HOA had no choice but to officially acknowledge my rights. Every so-called violation, every threatened fine, every warning about community rules was rendered null and void. The emails stopped, the phone calls ceased, and the disapproving stares at meetings evaporated into polite, if awkward, nods. It was a remarkable transformation. The tension that had felt so pervasive was suddenly lifted, leaving a profound sense of clarity and justice in its place. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the tight knot of stress pressing on my chest. Walking outside to the creek that ran behind my house, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The water flowed gently, undisturbed, reflecting the morning sunlight, as it had for decades before the chaos began. There was a serene beauty in watching it ripple over rocks and curve through the landscape, a tangible reminder that some things, like truth and rightful ownership, endure despite opposition. Standing there, I realized the full scope of what had just happened. This wasn't merely a personal victory. It was a moment of justice, a moment where fairness had prevailed against persistence and aggression. The sense of satisfaction was more than just relief. It was a deep, resonant affirmation that standing firm, even when others try to undermine you, can lead to meaningful outcomes. I had faced a relentless force, a person convinced of her authority, and yet, by staying grounded in the truth and prepared with evidence, I had transformed a situation of intimidation into a demonstration of fairness. It was empowering, validating, and inspiring all at once. Every step of resistance, every moment of patience, had led to this point, and the triumph felt richly deserved. As I listened to the creek's gentle murmur, I reflected on the lessons embedded in the experience. Justice isn't always immediate, and it isn't always obvious. Often, it requires persistence, courage, and an unwavering commitment to what is right. The satisfaction of seeing fairness restored, watching the person who tried to manipulate rules for personal gain step back, was amplified by the knowledge that this resolution was achieved through preparation, calm reasoning, and steadfast resolve, not retaliation or anger. That afternoon, I felt a profound sense of closure. The neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, but for me, nothing would feel quite the same. I had proven that even against relentless opposition, one could assert their rights and restore balance. The peaceful flow of the creek became a symbol of endurance, resilience, and the quiet strength of standing up for oneself. In that moment, I knew that justice, when pursued fully and courageously, can prevail, and that sometimes the most satisfying victories are those that reaffirm our sense of fairness and self-respect.